In the engineering world, there are three key components that factor into a risk assessment: impact, probability, and confidence. Impact was captured from the heart's influence in Chapter 7, but probability and confidence belong to the domain of the brain. Its computational personality leads to bold predictions of the future, while its capacity for reason can introspectively assess its confidence in these predictions. Here we see the brain with two seemingly opposed functions, yet they complement each other when balanced. A brain that thinks too probabilistically falls to hubris, while a brain that thinks too introspectively becomes self-conscious. The ability to walk the balance between self-assurance and self-awareness in one's capabilities is a signal of an advanced mind. The author has no means of prescribing where such a balance rests, but we can witness these capabilities by considering the two remaining pieces of a risk assessment. 1. Probability assessment of each risk-reward. 2. Confidence assessment of each probability assessment. The first step lets the brain's appetite for probabilistic thinking run wild, while the second step surveys the metacognitive landscape laid out in Step 1. Before we begin, a disclaimer from the introspective side of the brain. The exercises in this chapter are not meant to be taken literally, since the probabilities you generate cannot reliably forecast the future. Nobody can repeatedly forecast probabilities with accuracy, so the purpose of this section is less about using probabilities to guide decisions, and more about using probabilities to understand the analyses in subsequent chapters. While we cannot forecast the future with certainty, we can still leverage our current knowledge to guide us towards quality decisions. No great leaders have ever known all factors that influence a decision, yet they still outwardly radiate confidence as they proceed with the limited information at their disposal. The next exercise aims to assist with understanding what information is available and what is missing. Once we have this information, we can start to build the big picture. Bear with me for this chapter as we defy intuition for a minute and pretend we can predict the future. It will help us make sense of subsequent chapters. Probability assessment. For each risk and reward you've identified, there's a few key characteristics that influence their probability. 1. The level of influence you have over the outcome. 2. Which of your abilities influence the outcome. 3. How your situation differs from similar outcomes. Considering these three topics leads you to a consensus about the likelihood of each risk and reward occurring. Your probability assessment will serve as inputs to later exercises that build the big picture. Your influence. The best starting point of any probability assessment is to consider the role you play in each potential event. What factors are within your control and which factors are outside your control. The best way to do this is to think about all the factors that could impact your outcome but are completely outside your sphere of influence. Are there unfavorable geopolitical conditions brewing? Does your desired outcome rely on decisions made by people removed from your influence? It is impossible to objectively answer such questions because control is a nebulous concept in an increasingly complex world. Due to the world's intricate causal relationships, it becomes difficult to know where your influence begins and ends. You will not have an absolute answer to these questions. However, relative answers provide direction. Think about how much influence you have over the impacting factors relative to your other options. For example, if you are starting a company a la option B in Chapter 3, many of the factors influencing your success are within your control when compared to a stable corporate job. In the corporate world, there are more moving parts veiled from your view, while your startup almost entirely relies on your ideation, discipline, and skill set. Of course, your discipline and downstream success could falter from unforeseen circumstances, but the point of relativity still stands. Your actions at your startup are in your control to a much higher degree than your boss's actions at your corporate job. It is important to have an estimate of the relative ratio of factors outside your control to factors within your control, since it should primarily drive confidence in your probability assessment. An event largely outside your control should lower your confidence in your probability assessment, yet you can hold more confidence in the projected results you heavily influence. We will dig deeper into this later. While your influence does not contribute to your probability assessment de jure, it creates a de facto contribution by leading to the next subsequent question. Do I have the capabilities to influence this situation towards a favorable outcome? Your capabilities. This is where the brain's introspective side helps. Contemplating questions like the following can lead to a deeper understanding of which skills and attitudes apply to this situation, how they size up to the task at hand, and whether they can help or harm your outcome. If someone were to take the option you're considering, what skills would they need? Would an outsider look at you and say you have those skills at the appropriate level of proficiency? Do you have a track record of discipline towards activities that lead to your vision of success? With optimism defined as belief in the possibility of a favorable outcome, how optimistic are you about each risk and reward? Optimism may be the most important to consider since it is possibly the most potent ingredient to achieve your version of success. The recipe is pretty simple. People who don't believe in themselves are guaranteed failure. As Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. This is not to say the optimistic automatically succeed, rather that the pessimistic are destined to their self-fulfilling prophecy. If you have a pessimistic outlook, it's worth considering why. Maybe you realistically lack the skills to achieve your desired results. Perhaps you have a defeatist attitude. Regardless of your root cause, this situation kills the probability of an optimal outcome until you take the time to change it. Fortunately, we live in an age where you have the permission to access information necessary to develop any skill set. Further, the identity change cycle from Chapter 4 can be leveraged to cultivate an optimistic mindset. Similar situations. Another useful exercise in assessing the likelihood of an outcome is to consider people living with the decisions in front of you. How often do the risks, rewards materialize for them? What factors make your situation similar or unique to theirs? Since survivorship bias is influential, it is worth listening to people with both successful and unsuccessful results, because in cases of success, people tend to underplay the role of chance while overplaying their abilities. Likewise, people who failed tend to think they had a run of bad luck with little influence from skill. Let's think about our previous example of starting a business. Maybe an understanding of the failure rate of startups both in your industry and in general could help, especially if you learn why they fail. Noting what makes your situation similar or unique to these case studies can provide direction on the validity of these statistics. Perhaps your vision of success is more personal and harder to measure. Let's say you are considering leaving your hedonistic bachelor lifestyle to start a family. Obviously, you can research data about marriages and families, but the impact is more personal than data points can indicate. It's worth conversing with both people in perfect families, those in broken homes, and those committed to solitude. If you can understand each group's pain points and sources of joy, you may uncover something you never considered. After evaluating the level of influence you have over the outcome, how your capabilities impact the results, and how your situation relates with those that faced a similar decision, you should have a rough idea of the likelihood of a risk or reward. Of course, externalizing these probability assessments helps you give a fairer assessment for comparison purposes. Confidence assessment. After you've conducted a probability analysis like every other number-crunching brainiac, let's take the extra step that few can accurately accomplish with their probability assessments. Evaluate your confidence level. Confidence can be difficult to ascertain on your own. If you follow a traditional risk assessment, you'll find complicated mathematical formulas driving confidence levels. Traditional risk assessments are problematic because they sterilize the critical thinking that goes into a probability assessment by hiding the driving assumptions behind formulas incomprehensible to the average person. For the small sliver of the population that understands these formulas on a fundamental level and the assumptions behind them, these can be great tools. Unfortunately, the average person does not have the knowledge to use these responsibly. Instead of relinquishing your thought process to a formula, let's walk through some questions that could help you think critically about your confidence level in each of your probability rankings. What factors are distorting your judgment? Is the importance of a risk-reward skewing your judgment of its likelihood? Are you so focused on the risks that could lead to failure that you overestimate their likelihood? Conversely, are you assuming a reward will happen simply because you want it to happen? Assuming you will be successful is an important mindset to cultivate, as we discussed earlier, but just because you want or don't want something to happen does not necessarily mean life will play in your favor. As we alluded to in previous chapters, decisions become murky when it is unclear whether the heart or brain is whispering in your ear. By questioning whether the heart-driven impact of an event is influencing your brain's probability assessment, you can clarify which voice you hear. Without this line of questioning, the brain's probability assessment can easily be contaminated by the heart's desires. Do you have all the information? Most of us look back on life and find that small, chance encounters played a massive role in shaping who we are today. An old friend randomly texted you to catch up, and you two ended up falling in love. Or maybe your casual conversation at the bar led you to find your business partner. Only in retrospect could you realize these serendipitous encounters would forever change your life. Never would or could you have foreseen them. Perhaps these chance encounters are not completely random and are the product of divine intervention. Or maybe chance and divine intervention are synonymous phrases. Regardless, it's conceited to pretend you can forecast the future in a web of such random events, no matter how strong your connection is with your Creator. As Soren Kierkegaard said, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. We never have all of the information influencing a decision because the future is littered with such chance encounters that can only be understood retrospectively. This truth should not shatter your confidence in your ability to move forward, but it should poke a hole in the confidence of your probability assessments. Unless, of course, you are operating in a highly regulated environment, insulated from the effects of randomness. Can you assume the future holds similar conditions as the past or present? People tend to use the past as an indicator for the future when considering probability, but this can be flawed. As time passes, the context of the world changes. New technologies, geopolitical conditions, and popular narratives change the landscape. These factors are all living entities that constantly change over time. Rarely do you see these factors align in different periods of time, and yet they greatly influence your life. It is difficult to assume the future, or even the present, will reflect the past when the surrounding context is constantly changing and never identical. Perhaps some patterns can be gleaned amid the chaos, but again, only in retrospect. Many of the questions posed in this chapter are not easy to answer, but taking a few minutes to ponder your assumptions and the information you may be missing can save you from poor inferences and blind hubris. The author's hope is that unless you are in a closed man-made system, the exercises in this chapter illustrate that you are likely missing a large swath of information. Hence, your confidence in your probability assessment should be fairly low. We will discuss how to handle low confidence in situations in a later chapter. In the next chapter, we'll explore how we can create a big picture from impact, probability, and confidence inputs while avoiding some of the pitfalls of conventional risk assessment.